Hello and welcome to Unit 6, Female Reproduction, Day 4, the last day of the reproductive system. And today's aim says, what adaptations in the female reproductive system allow for fetal development? So adaptations is a word that has to do with evolution. And adaptations assist in our ability to survive. So these adaptations assist in the mother and baby's ability to survive. And obviously they assist in reproduction because we're talking all about the reproductive system. So we're gonna get to more about evolution in Unit 8, but let's continue to discuss the reproductive system and fetal development. So this is the last day of human reproduction. Next week, we will have a lab comparing sexual reproduction in plants to sexual reproduction in humans, and then we will be done with Unit 6. You will have your exam, and we're gonna go on to Unit 7, which is genetics. So before we continue today, let's first do these questions that are a little review. Question 1. The diagram below represents human reproductive systems. Which statement best describes part of the human reproductive process? A, testosterone produced in A is transferred to D, where it influences embryonic development. So I don't think anything is being transferred from the testes to the ovaries with the exception of the sperm cell, right? It's not the testosterone that's going there. And it's not going to the ovaries, it's going to the fallopian tube, so that one's wrong. Testosterone produced in D influences formation of sperm within B. So I don't think the sperm forms in the penis, so that one is gonna be wrong. Oh, or is testosterone is also not produced in the ovary. So these questions both require you to do two things. You have to be able to recognize what's going on in these diagrams and then also associate the functions of those structures with the responses below. So it's kind of a compound question. Estrogen and progesterone influence the activity of C, so the activity of the uterus. Let's put a little flower around that one. Progesterone stimulates the division of the egg within C. So that is not correct. Our answer is C. Estrogen and progesterone influence the activity of the uterus. And we're about to read quite a bit about that below. Let's take a look at question number 2. The data in the table below indicates the presence of specific reproductive hormones in blood samples taken from 3 individuals. An X in the hormone column indicates a positive lab test for the appropriate levels necessary for normal reproductive functioning in that individual. So we can see here in this data table, individual number 1 has no testosterone present, but they have progesterone and estrogen. So this should tell us right away that individual number 1 is pregnant, right? Because progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. Individual number 2 still has estrogen present, so we can determine that they are female, but there is no progesterone present, so they are likely not pregnant. And individual number 3 has no progesterone or estrogen present, so they are male. Which process could occur in individual number 3? Production of sperm only, production of sperm and production of eggs and embryonic development, or production of eggs only. And we can see that individual number 3 only has testosterone, so they can only make sperm. All right, C and A are our first 2 answers. Now let's read about the placenta. The placenta has been described as a pancake-shaped organ that attaches to the inside of the uterus and is connected to the fetus by the umbilical cord. So these are some new terms. So the placenta is connected to the fetus by the umbilical cord. It forms inside of the uterus during pregnancy The placenta produces pregnancy-related hormones, including chorionic gonadotropin, estrogen, and progesterone. The placenta is responsible for working as a trading post, and we're going to emphasize this in a different color because this is really the most important thing about the placenta. The placenta is responsible for working as a trading post between the mother's and the baby's blood supply. So this is the job of the placenta, to filter the mother's blood supply, but also ensure that the fetus is adequately supplied with blood and nutrients. Small blood vessels carrying the fetal blood run through the placenta, so they allow there to be a transfer of nutrients and gases between the maternal and fetal blood without the maternal and the fetal blood mixing. Small blood vessels carrying the fetal blood run through the placenta, which is full of maternal blood. Nutrients and oxygen from the mother's blood are transferred to the fetal blood, while waste products are transferred from the fetal blood to the maternal blood. So the fetal blood is able to transfer its waste products into the maternal blood because the mother has a functioning excretory system and she is able to void the body of those waste products. She's able to exhale carbon dioxide and produce urine in her kidneys that will excrete other wastes without the two blood supplies mixing, and that is key. So what is the role of the placenta during pregnancy and how does it act as a barrier and filter? The placenta acts as a trading post. And again, I'm getting this right from the text. Acts as a trading post between maternal and fetal blood. Providing nutrients to the fetus and allowing waste to be transferred from the fetal blood to the maternal blood supply. And then this is the filtration system. It's sending what the fetus needs to the fetus, the nutrients and the gases like oxygen, especially because remember the fetus is inside of an aqueous environment. We're about to read about the amniotic sac, but the fetus is in the uterus. So it's almost breathing like a fish with gills, right? It's not able to get oxygen through its respiratory system yet. All of the oxygen that it gets is coming through the umbilical cord and the placenta, right? So the placenta is this filtration system. It is removing the waste from the fetal blood and taking in the nutrients and oxygen from the maternal blood. The placenta also does not allow the maternal and fetal blood supply to mix, hence the barrier. All right, so let's just read through that again because it was a little complicated. What is the role of the placenta during pregnancy and how does it act as a barrier and filter? The placenta acts as a trading post between maternal and fetal blood, providing nutrients to the fetus and allowing waste to be transferred from the fetal blood to maternal blood supply. The placenta does not allow maternal and fetal blood to mix. Now let's read about the amniotic sac. And so, I just want to show you down here, this is the placenta. And we're going to read about all these parts in this handout, so we're going to label them as we go throughout. So that is the placenta, and you can see it's a pancake-shaped organ that develops inside the uterus during pregnancy, so it's not there if the mother is not pregnant, but it develops as the pregnancy progresses, and it produces hormones that the mother needs, but also help relax her muscles so that she can accept this growing baby inside of her abdominal cavity. And it filters, again, you can see it's like stashed full of capillaries, right? All those little blood vessels. And it provides a nice filtration system for that growing little fetus. Get everything it needs from mom and to prevent the blood supplies from mixing. All animals that reproduce in the water, such as frogs, this presents no problem. However, for animals that reproduce on land, the need for a watery environment poses an important problem. The solution to this problem evolved millions of years ago. A series of membranes forms around the developing embryo. The most important membrane, so let's highlight a couple of things here in this passage. Eggs develop in a fluid environment, right? There is an aqueous or fluid, liquid environment inside of the uterus. For animals that reproduce in water, they don't need to do anything special. They just lay their eggs in water. But for animals that reproduce on land, they have, let's draw it in yellow, they have hard shelled eggs. Like birds, for example. Or reptiles have hard shelled eggs. So this is an egg, bird, or reptile. And unlike frogs' eggs or fish eggs that you may have seen in water, just sort of looking like individual cells, you can see right through them, you can see the nucleus. Birds' eggs, like chicken's eggs that you might eat, come in a hard shell, right? Well, why does that hard shell exist? It exists to protect the fluid environment inside of the egg. So it is wet inside of the egg, right? If you've ever cracked an egg, it's wet in there. And in the center is the yolk, which is really the nucleus of this single cell, pretty big cell, right? And if you've ever seen an ostrich's egg, that is a really large one cell, right? And the eggs that we eat from the grocery store are unfertilized, so they are just that single cell, like that would be released in a human during ovulation. But they have that hard exterior shell to make sure that the inside of the egg stays nice and moist. All right. But for humans, we don't lay our eggs, right? They develop inside of an aqueous environment in our bodies. So this most important membrane that provides protection to the growing embryo is the amniotic sac. It has three main functions. It surrounds the embryo, protects the embryo, and holds in a fluid that cushions the embryo. Due to this amniotic sac, land animals develop in water, just like those in aquatic environments. So again, The land animals, like birds and reptiles that lay their eggs, lay them in a aqueous environment that exists and is preserved inside of the egg by a hard shell. In humans, we have that inside of our bodies, inside of the uterus. This membrane develops to keep that nice, moist environment for development of the embryo. So, the amniotic sac maintains a fluid environment for embryonic development. Serving three main functions. And again, this is right from the text. The amniotic sac surrounds the embryo, protects the embryo, and holds in a fluid that cushions the embryo. Right, so mom can sort of like jump up around, run, and even though her body is filled with, things that are hard like bones, the developing embryo is cushioned by the amniotic sac and it holds in a fluid. So if you've ever heard of a pregnant woman having her water break, that is when the amniotic sac bursts and the amniotic fluid is released. So we'll add that on here. And this is really important. So if that sac bursts before the mother is ready to give birth, okay, before the baby is done cooking, that is going to be very dangerous. And if there is like a leak of amniotic fluid, the mother may need to be on bed rest, meaning that she can't get out of bed until she's ready to give birth because the cushion that protects the growing baby is compromised. So we can see down here, this sort of circle, and you can see it's a membrane that exists within the uterus, right? The uterus is out here. We can see the endometrium, which is really what creates that placenta. But the endometrial lining is still present in the uterus. The muscles on the walls of the uterus are nice and thick, but there is this other sort of membrane within the uterus, and that is the amniotic sac. All right. Now let's read about the umbilical cord, what gives us all a belly button. The umbilical cord is the lifeline that attaches the placenta to the fetus. The umbilical cord is made up of 3 blood vessels, 2 smaller arteries which carry blood to the placenta, and a larger vein which returns blood to the fetus. It can grow to be 60 centimeters long, allowing the baby enough cord to safely move around without causing damage to the cord or the placenta. After the baby is born, the cord is cut, something the baby's father may wish to do. The remaining section will heal and form the baby's belly button. During pregnancy, many women find out that the umbilical cord is in a knot or is wrapped around part of the baby's body. This is common and cannot be prevented, and it does not usually pose any threats to the baby. What is the role of the umbilical cord during fetal development? The umbilical cord is a collection of blood vessels that connect the placenta to the fetus. And provide nutrients and oxygen to fetus while carrying waste away from fetus. So this is the blood vessels that serve the same role as the placenta, right? The placenta has the collection of capillaries that allow for these blood supplies to not mix, right? Just like our capillary beds do in the rest of our bodies. And then the larger blood vessels in the umbilical cord actually carry the maternal blood to the fetus and carry the fetal blood away from the fetus back into the mother's blood supply. And the placenta is the barrier and filter between those 2 blood supplies. And we can see here the umbilical cord attached to the little baby. And that is the umbilical cord number 2. And you can see it is connected to the baby right at its like lower abdomen. And once the baby is born, that cord is still connected, which is why it needs to be cut by the father or by a doctor or by a midwife, someone who is there during pregnancy. A mother can even cut her own umbilical cord if she is feeling up to it and able to like bend down low enough to get it. But it is a cord that once the baby is born is still connected to the placenta. And the placenta will also come out during birth. So after the baby is born, all this stuff comes out after, which, you know, some people might not realize. After the baby is born, you got to push one more time for something else to come out. And that is the placenta. The umbilical cord obviously does need to be cut, and then it is clamped to prevent bleeding from the baby. And within a couple of days after birth, the umbilical cord will sort of dry up and turn like a blackish color because it is no longer being supplied with fresh blood. And the umbilical cord will fall off, and the baby will be left with a little belly button. I don't know why I keep saying belly button so funny, but it is a funny word. I guess the less silly word is navel, but I like belly button. All right, now differentiation, a word that we've heard a few times. Let's go ahead and read about it. During the next stage of embryonic development, cells begin to move, changing position in a highly regulated fashion until a three-layered structure called a gastrula is formed. So this is in the next stage after the zygote, right? Going from zygote to embryo to fetus. What happens? Each layer of the gastrula gives rise to particular body parts and systems in the developing embryo. Wow. At this point in development, the rest of the embryo cells are still quite similar to each other. Right? They all have the exact same DNA, and at this point, they haven't differentiated into different cell types like we have in our adult bodies. However, the process of cellular changes now begins. As cells start to develop into muscle cells, skin cells, blood cells, or other tissue types, they begin to join to form organs. Cell differentiation is occurring. All of the cells contain the same genetic information, but each type of cell uses this information differently. By the time birth occurs, all the major structures of the animal have been formed. How is it that once a fetus begins to look like a human baby, all cells in the fetus have the same DNA, but the cells form different structures? So we can see that all of the cells contain the same genetic information, but each type of cell uses this information differently. So each type of cell uses this information differently. So very early on in development. Early on in development, we have what are called stem cells. And what that means is they are cells that have not been differentiated yet. Cells that have the potential to turn into any different type of cell. Those cells are still sometimes present when the baby is born within the umbilical cord. Those cells are very valuable for people that have like spinal injuries, for example, because they can be used to form new spinal cord to help heal a person that may be paralyzed to be able to walk again. And it's because those cells are the same cells, if it says here, that can develop into muscle cells, skin cells, blood cells, or any other tissue types. But within our DNA are the instructions for this differentiation. Our DNA provides the instructions that say, hey, we're going to need 400 skin cells, 40 liver cells, 30 eye cells, 30 tongue cells. Like get cooking. And that information is all contained in the DNA. And we're going to talk a lot about DNA in Unit 7. That is all about genetics. So if you're like, seems like we don't have all the information here, we will coming up because DNA is a pretty complicated molecule. So define differentiation. Differentiation is how cellular changes occur. The process by which cells with identical DNA form into different tissue types. Like it says here, by utilizing different portions of the DNA. And this occurs during fetal development. Let's be more specific. This begins during embryonic development and continues with the chart we looked at yesterday, showing the different structures forming inside of the growing embryo and then fetus. Those different structures are formed by this process of differentiation. And continues until just before birth. All right, now lastly, we're going to finish labeling this diagram. So structure number 1, that is the cervix, which is what dilates when a woman is about to give birth. So we've really looked at the cervix already just as the sort of door between the birth canal or vagina and the uterus. But during pregnancy, a mucus plug forms in the cervix that is antibacterial and protects the developing baby from anything that could harm it, that could come in from the outside, right? That could enter through the vaginal canal. That mucal plug, or mucus plug rather, will fall out right before the baby is about to be born, right? So the mucus plug falls out, the water breaks, and then labor is in process. And you can see here 4, that is the site of fertilization, of course. That is the oviduct or fallopian tube. Different word, mean the same thing. And then, like we discussed in today's lesson, we have also the umbilical cord shaded there in peach. It is the lifeline connecting the growing fetus to the placenta. We have the all-important placenta, which is the barrier and filter between maternal blood and fetal blood that prevents those blood supplies from mixing. And then we have number 5, the amniotic sac, which provides a fluid environment that cushions, surrounds, and protects the growing fetus. And that is a little baby fetal development diagram. And that is the end of the female reproductive system. Please go ahead and complete your exit ticket. Today's aim was what adaptations in the female reproductive system allow for fetal development. And we talked about placenta, amniotic sacs, umbilical cords, and the all-important process of cell differentiation. That's all I have for you today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you guys all next week and in person on Zoom or in this classroom. Have a great day. Bye.